Jax is manipulative, insensitive, and sadistic. But the reality is that behind every cruel joke, we find a rather tragic truth, and after knowing what he did to his friends, many believe he deserved his tragic ending, while others were completely devastated. But in reality, do you know why Jax was like this? What traumas and tragedies did he have to live through to become so ruthless? Since we met Jax, we saw that he has certain very interesting qualities. He is completely resigned to finding a way out. He uses others to mock them. He is very cynical and seems to have no empathy for anything. But what no one understands is that Jax was in the penultimate phase of his abstraction, because Jax's purpose was not simply to be the bully of the group. He understood in the cruelest way that if nothing matters to you, nothing can break you. Jax only uses his cruel humor as a simple way to protect himself, and in fact, it is not just the abuse. He has many destructive ways to avoid getting hurt, and it is time to analyze each one. Let's start with that sarcastic and cynical sense of humor with which Jax relates to others. When Kaufmo abstracts, everyone is worried, except Jax. He even makes quite hurtful comments saying things like, "That Kaufmo is better than ever?" How is Kaufmo? Oh, he is doing great. In fact, I think I'd never seen him so happy. Furthermore, he asked me to give you this. This type of comment only reflects the lack of empathy that our purple rabbit wants to demonstrate. They broke my comedy mask. So Kane, are we gonna have an adventure for the newbie or what? He takes advantage of Gangle's suffering to show her that things can be even worse than they already are, and that even so, nothing should matter. And then we have the part where Jax is cruel on purpose. He throws Pomni into the truck just because he finds it funny, without taking into account that Pomni is new, can feel pain, and is still confused by what is happening. Hey, maybe I didn't leave the door open for nothing. Ah, what? I thought he was dead. You left it open. Wait a minute, what did you do? Well, a pleasure helping you guys. See you. Bye. He lets the candy monster in when the adventure had already come to an end. Jax returns only to let the candy monster through and reaffirm how rewarding pain and suffering are for him. And when he partners with Pomni on many occasions, he manipulates her into crossing dangerous limits regardless of Pomni's opinion. But one of Jax's most toxic attitudes is that he does not even feel guilt. In several of these scenes, he never apologizes. On the contrary, he uses blackmail as a means of emotional control. Do it, or I would tell Ragatha about your little drawings. And all the times he makes Gangle cry, he behaves as if he were doing her a favor by showing her how cruel the world can be and that she should get used to it. This relates to the following behavior. Constant provocation. Jax loves creating chaos that manages to destroy and destabilize others. He spends his time contradicting everyone and destroying the little hope they have left. When Jax questions Pomni about whether she truly believes Gangle can be happy, he didn't do it to affect Gangle more. Do you think Gangle can really be happy, Pomni? What? I mean, whatever she does, her comedy mask always breaks. Do you think that hanging out with Zubul magically fixed it? I thought you didn't care what others thought. It's just, no, of course, I don't care. It's true. With this, Jax simply wanted to test how much optimism Pomni had left. And something very interesting is that Jax spends his time provoking and attacking Ragatha in a very sadistic way, and later I will explain why. Lastly, we have that disinterest and indifference that Jax shows others regarding their pain. When Pomni arrives at the circus, he has absolutely no interest in making her feel comfortable. He takes advantage of the highly anxious state Pomni is in to elevate that feeling even more, telling her all the horrible things that await her. If there were a way to leave, I think we would have left. And now I ask you, do you really believe that Jax enjoys doing this? Is he really evil? The short answer is yes. Yes, he is evil, but not because he wanted to be. He simply had no other option. But then, where did so much evil come from? To find out, we have to analyze Jax's arrival at the digital circus. When he got trapped with the others, Jax was not that psychopathic rabbit everyone hates. On the contrary, he was a rather sensitive character and very easy to make friends with. So much so that he managed to form a great bond of friendship alongside Kaufmo and Rebit. And the funny thing is that Ragatha also tried to be his friend. Someone truly evil is not capable of creating something as special as what Jax had with Kaufmo and Rebit. The friendship with those two was only a part of why he decided he doesn't deserve to be anyone's friend. And he made the decision right when he decided to show the most vulnerable part of himself to Rebit. Jax did have a very real conversation with her. He showed her his weak point, and for our rabbit to show vulnerability is a huge mistake. Here we realize that this is not the root of the problem. Jax already had that idea before entering the digital circus, which suggests to us that something very horrible must have happened to him to lose hope and trust in humanity. Jax is quite a deep character because his problems didn't begin in the circus. In this place, everything simply intensified, and thus he was forced to take the path that would best help him survive regardless of hurting others. And when we know his story, we will finish understanding why Jax chose to become a monster. Within our rabbit's human history, it was hinted to us many times that someone very close constantly mocked him. In episode 9, we found out that the person who hurt Jax so much was his own mother. We don't know exactly what these mockeries were about, but the memory with which Cain tortured him revealed the answer to us. We see Jax very scared on the ground with a bunch of shadows around him mocking him. Among these shadows, we can see several of the characters from the digital circus, but we also see how one of these shadows tears off part of his clothing, leaving him completely exposed. But what did this really mean? This scene reflects more than just a simple fear. It is the real problem which Jax is facing, and we must remember that Gooseworks herself has hinted that Jax's character is trans. Taking this idea into account, everything makes a lot of sense. The mockeries within Cain's torment are representing the lack of acceptance his mother has regarding his possible gender change. And when the shadows leave him completely exposed, they are practically telling us that Jax is not who he claims to be. And it terrifies Jax that others might discover it because of the way his mother reacted. And maybe they didn't understand why Ribbit placed a bow on Jax after their talk and our rabbit ended up blushing. Jax confessed everything to Ribbit that night. That was where he revealed who he really was. And the bow on Jax's head was simply an affectionate way for Ribbit to tell him not to worry and that she already knew what he was talking about. But the worst part is that Jax didn't want to wait for Ribbit to mock him. And that's why he gave an insignificant tone to this talk, only to later say that it had all just been a fabrication. Oh, you mean about I lied to you? Yeah, you knew, right? I pulled it all from a Wattpad fanfic I read once. You actually believed it. So who is Jax really? Jax is a 25-year-old boy named Leroy Mateo. From what we know so far, he grew up living trapped in a body in which he didn't feel comfortable. When he decided to open up to his mom and tell her what was happening, she simply reacted by mocking how on earth her son wanted to become a girl. All these constant mockeries about his identity generated a complete rejection towards others. Because come on, the person who should support you the most disappointed him and left him vulnerable. This would be the point where the hero decides to never trust or tell anyone what happens to him. But tired of not being able to be free, he ended up redirecting his hatred and frustration toward the only person who fed his anger, his mom. And so one day, he ended up pushing her so hard that she was left unconscious on the floor. So Jax had to run away as fast as he could. When the hero arrives at the circus, now as Jax, he was already dragging along many unresolved problems. Not knowing who he was, the lack of understanding from others, his identity struggle, and the distrust towards everyone. Probably upon arriving, he had the hope that everything there could be different. He tried to adapt, he became friends with Ribbit and Kaufmo, and everything seemed to be working wonderfully. But Jax never expected someone very close to start taking an interest in him more than they should. And the fact is that Ribbit plays a very important role in the development of a ruthless Jax. Ribbit began to fall in love with Jax, and for our rabbit, this was something he couldn't accept, since he couldn't even figure himself out, accept himself, let alone love himself. So if he didn't love himself, how was he going to be able to love someone else? And it was Ribbit's interest that once again turned Jax's world upside down. He wasn't ready for something this deep. Everything went too far the night he confessed to Ribbit who he really was and the horrible thing he did to his mother. A huge mistake, or at least that is the last thing he thought when he was still human before the digital circus. The reaction Jax expected from Ribbit in that moment was for her to mock him just like the others did in his human life. He didn't understand that Ribbit was simply behaving like a great friend, and thus he made a decision that would protect him, but that would completely change the destiny of both of them. Here comes the part why everyone hates Jax. After that talk, Jax started behaving indifferently and distantly towards his friend Ribbit, just to prevent Ribbit from asking him more questions, to avoid saying more about himself. He played heavy pranks on her. He started responding sarcastically and avoided talking about the subject again with Ribbit at all costs. This generated an enormous confusion in Ribbit, and Jax realized that, and took advantage of this vulnerability to push Ribbit into abstraction. The worst part is that Jax was always aware that Ribbit could abstract due to how rude and hurtful he was being to her. And even so, he didn't stop. He kept excluding her from everywhere until Ribbit couldn't bear so much psychological damage and finally broke. This was the moment when the good Jax officially died, and he knew it. Here Jax's philosophy was born. If nothing matters to you, nothing can break you. He realized how important he was to Ribbit and how she ended up. For this reason, he couldn't allow himself to be anyone's friend. He couldn't care for anyone. So he decided to act as if nothing mattered. He was in a digital world. He didn't even know if they were real or if there was a way out. So what did it matter to hurt and have fun with everyone if there are no consequences? And this, my friends, is a quite dangerous way of thinking. Because the moment Jax decided to think that way, there are no limits. This is why from then on he decided to take control of the others, manipulating them, mocking them, being cruel, and distancing himself more and more from everyone until the day of Kaufmo's abstraction arrived. This loss was the final piece for Jax to become the next one. And remember, I told you that Jax was the only one who seemed to not care about this situation. That was just a defense mechanism. Jax had to ignore it so it wouldn't hurt as much, and he wouldn't carry that remorse just like with Ribbit. Because remember, if nothing matters, nothing can destroy you. Then Jax started taking it out on everyone. With Gangles, he particularly enjoyed seeing her emotionally fragile and destroying her more because Gangle was his personal reminder of what Jax shouldn't do. That's why he hated her so much. With Ragatha, things were different. She tried many times to get close and talk to Jax, but after what happened with Ribbit, it wouldn't be possible to become friends with her. Ragatha represents everything that Jax doesn't want to accept, since Ragatha cares about others. She tries to keep everyone united and getting along, but that in Jax's head doesn't exist and shouldn't exist, and much less could he accept it, because if Jax accepted it, he would also have to accept the suffering and all his emotional problems. He would have to accept that he destroyed Ribbit, Kaufmo, and himself. So when Pomni arrives at the circus, Jax sees it as a new way to escape his reality, doing exactly the same thing he did with the others. But what Jax didn't expect is that Pomni would be one of the most emotionally resilient characters, and he knew that from the moment Pomni appeared in the circus. He tested her on many occasions within the welcome adventure, but Pomni wasn't as reactive as other characters. Our rabbit's comments didn't seem to affect her as much as they affected Ragatha, Gangle, or even Zubul. The whole relationship we saw between Pomni and Jax was one of the most real in the circus. Pomni kept getting closer to Jax despite his indifference. She insisted and never gave up. Even when they're paired up, Jax could realize that he could still have fun and be himself with Pomni. But as we saw with his past relationships, this was too terrifying for him. So he did exactly the same thing to her as he did to Ribbit. He humiliated her and made her feel like a fool for offering him her friendship. The difference with Ribbit is that Pomni did confront him and also told him the hard truths. In their argument, Jax was left completely disarmed, and the realest thing he said was, "I am nothing else, so stop looking." Pomni truly had the hope that she could save him, and it was a shame that she arrived too late. Jax had already made his decision since the night he talked with Ribbit. He was just a ticking time bomb waiting to end up abstracting. All that remorse came back to Jax because of Pomni. She could have been Ribbit. That's why Jax tells her that everything was better before she and Zubul arrived. Jax never wanted to accept that he was also interested in Ribbit, and the worst part is that he never told her and could never apologize. And when everyone starts questioning the exit and investigating as much as they can with Kinger, Jax reacts that way because he is about to lose his only safe place. In other words, besides carrying on his conscience all the tragic moments he had already lived, now he also had to fight with the idea that they are nothing and that, indeed, nothing matters. This is something quite contradictory because Jax was always faithful to his philosophy. That's why he was the way he was. But deep down, he did care, and he was being hurt. It is at this point that a rather disturbed mind like Jax's encountered a place with no way out, which ends up becoming a double prison for him. And now, what was his only way out? Exactly, abstracting. But the worst part is that not even in his mind could he be free, and Pomni came to show him that, yes, it was true that nothing mattered and nothing made sense, but all that time trapped, they could have used it to make everything worth it. And with all this, we can now understand the meaning of all the Jaxes. Pomni enters Jax's head. She doesn't find the real Jax. She finds too many Jaxes. And all these Jaxes are not different personalities or copies. These are masks he used to pretend that nothing mattered. We find the mocking one, the cruel one, the provoking one, the one who pretends nothing matters to him. But we also find a chained Jax, which represented the sensitive and vulnerable part that Jax didn't want to show. The piano represents his feelings. He was a prisoner of his own feelings. The female version of Jax just represents that cynical and sarcastic side, mocking himself. And Jax used so many versions of himself to survive in the circus that he ended up losing himself. This is how we witness the end of a disturbed mind without any kind of support. No one knew how to truly get close to Jax when he could still be saved. Pomni arrived, but it was already too late for Jax. Our rabbit was no psychopath as many think, otherwise the story would have been completely different. But tell me, what do you think about Jax? After this, do you think he deserved his ending, or would you give him a second chance if you could? Yeah,